What if the combination of One for All and All for One could allow the ability to control everyone with a quirk and quirk factor, and it's all inside of the spiritual void that's inside of One for All? What I mean by this is, yo, what's poppin' Dynamites? Wing your zone, everyday wise is here. Welcome to MangaVation, and today I'll be explaining my theory on an interesting ability from One for All and the true reason that All for One needs One for All. One for All is the main quirk in My Hero Academia. And what I mean by this is, One for All is not just our main character's quirk. It alone has its own weight of importance to it, unlike anything else in the series, even Deku himself. One for All seemingly is a message, a symbolism of a brighter future. It has its own goals, and with or without Deku, it has a mission it needs to accomplish. One for All is the only quirk that can counter and stop the overpowered quirk All for One. And while many people would claim that since All Might cultivated One for All and was able to defeat All for One, then as long as Deku develops his body to use One for All perfectly, everything will be fine. One for All is a quirk unlike any other in the series, including All for One. It's a combination of a quirk that allows its user the ability to transfer their own quirk, and with the help of All for One, it adds the ability to stockpile and cultivate energy inside of One for All, making it to where when you transfer One for All to the next generation user, it is stronger than that of its past generations. However, the thing that makes One for All the perfect counter to All for One is the fact that All for One is not able to steal and possess the power of One for All. In My Hero Academia chapter 257, when All Might was discussing all the potential quirks Deku will receive, he mentioned that in his reign of terror, All for One destroyed any and every strong person who opposed him. And he also mentioned that All for One was obsessed with One for All. All for One, as stated by 𝙲𝚘𝚙𝚢 himself, has been alive for 100 plus years. And considering that 𝙲𝚘𝚙𝚢 told this to All Might when he was around 18 years old, which was right after Nana Shimura's death, about 30 years before the current story, All for One would be over 130 years old. My point is, for around 100 plus years, All for One has desired the ability of One for All. And although it's not mentioned, I'm sure in his attempt to kill all the 7 previous users of One for All, he tried and ultimately failed to take One for All. But why does he desire it? I believe it's because he knows of some ability that would benefit him more than any other quirk in the series. All for One desires One for All because One for All is the completion of his quirk All for One. And with One for All, he possibly has the ability to control the world. And with that logic, the same could be true for the current One for All user. One for All is a transferable type quirk that has been possessed by 9 users, including Deku. It's a quirk that has 2 known elements in it, which are the ability to transfer quirks and the ability to stockpile energy. The combination of the two allows every generation that receives One for All to have the complete stockpiled energy of its previous user, giving them a boost in every physical attribute and making it stronger than it has ever been. The stockpiling quirk was given to the original One for All user because he seemingly was quirkless, and his brother All for One wanted him to have a quirk so that they could reign over Japan together. And little did All for One know, he actually helped create the quirk that would eventually defeat him. The interesting thing about One for All that no one seems to talk about is how it says it functions versus how we actually see it function. And what I mean by this is, One for All on the surface is a very simple quirk. We understand how Deku will easily become the strongest user and ultimately the strongest character in the series if he's able to control 100% of its power. But just as One for All is fairly simple, it's also super complex. In My Hero Academia chapter 193, Deku had a dream or a vision of the past, and what he saw was the first generation of quirks in the world. He experienced the trouble of All for One and the origin story of how One for All was created. And he even briefly met the first user of One for All. But the thing that's interesting is that it wasn't a dream at all. Well, not in the traditional sense. In My Hero Academia chapter 213, after being consumed by the manifestation of his new quirk Black Whip, Deku had a second vision with another successor of One For All. It is here that Deku acknowledged that the vestiges are more than that they are actually alive inside of One For All. To give you all a better perspective, a vestige is pretty much a trace of something that no longer exists. So if you ever thought you heard something from a loved one who passed on already, they are considered vestiges. However, in Deku's case, the previous users of One For All are actually alive, as in their souls are inside of One For All. And that brings a completely different dynamic when you look at One For All as a whole. So let's break down the interesting parts of One For All. One For All is first a quirk that can be transferred, and second a quirk that stockpiles energy. And due to All For One giving the original One For All user the stockpile quirk, let's take away the stockpiling ability and see what information we come up with. One For All with no stockpile is a quirk that can be transferred to other people, but that's not all it does. In My Hero Academia chapter 213, Deku is being told more information about One For All from the former user Daigoro Banjo, who actually is the 5th user of One For All. Banjo mentions something interesting. He tells Deku that Black Whip is his quirk, and he goes on and further explains that the past user's quirk and quirk factors are all merged inside of One For All. He says that it's all in the core of One For All and is concealed by the cultivated power. And when Deku received One For All, the cultivation started to expand even more and grew larger. So there's two things that you can take from that. The first being that One For All has the ability to merge anyone's quirk factor into itself, and that power is the core of One For All and is concealed by the cultivation. The second part is important because the fact that this ability is said to be concealed by the cultivation proves that the stockpiling quirk, which is the thing that's concealing in the cultivation, has nothing to do with the individual abilities of One For All. Meaning without the stockpiling quirk, One For All would still have these interesting abilities, but with the stockpile quirk activated, it enhances it tenfold. However, the most important thing is when Banjo says that One For All merges the quirk factors of all its users inside of One For All. And to really understand this, you have to know what quirk factors does. Quirk factors are the collective physical and genetic traits that composes a person's quirk, which simply means your genetics will change to fit the biological requirements needed to use a specific quirk. Like Tsuyu having the ability to stretch her tongue is a result of the quirk factors developing her genetics to use her frog quirk. And if someone like All For One would take her quirk away, her biology would completely change, reverting her to just a regular 16-year-old girl with 0 frog genetics. Now this is important because of a few things. The main thing is that humans aren't supposed to be able to handle more than one quirk. It's one of the bases of Dr. Ujiko's quirk singularity concepts. If the idea that a singular quirk's hardware is too intense for a natural human body, then having 2 quirks would almost destroy you, which is one of the main reasons for the creations and experimentations of the Noble. However, there is currently one character in the series that has more than 1 quirk and is fine, and that's Shoto. Shoto is the main anomaly that no one brings up in this case, but I believe it's due directly to having polar opposite quirks and how they're actually used, where his left side is his flame side and his right side is his ice side. He's not able to interchange them or combine them on a singular side, but he is the exception of someone possessing multiple quirks. You also have characters like Monoma, Toga, or even Overhaul, who although they don't have more than 1 quirk, they are able to use another person's quirk. However, that still doesn't fit into having 2 quirks because similar to how Aizawa Sensei can erase people's quirk, their ability to copy and overhaul quirks are based on their quirk factors being manipulated to copy and overhaul other people's quirks. But they indeed do only have 1 singular quirk. And this goes back to Deku and One For All because Deku is granted the ability to use 7 different quirks, which would clearly break the dynamics of quirk singularity. However, with One For All being a quirk that combines and merges all quirks and quirk factors into itself, Deku and any of the users that's after him would be able to use all 7 quirks. And in contrast to One For All, All for One's quirk, All for One, has the ability to transfer quirks and quirk factors to either himself and keep it, or to any other person. However, there's functional differences between the two that again makes One for All more interesting, and that's the fact that in order to transfer One for All, you need to consume DNA of the previous user. Many people theorize that Deku will eventually have All for One type of abilities where he will be able to both steal and transfer quirks to anyone. And although it is possible until it doesn't happen, there's no science to that at all. In fact, with the evidence here, it pretty much debunks all of those theories. Especially since in order for Deku to even transfer One for All, he needs DNA transfer, whereas All for One just needs to have his hand on your head. And the fact that One for All merges your quirk and quirk factors into itself, I just don't believe that the theory would be valid as much. Nonetheless, to explain One for All's ability so far, One for All has the ability to merge quirk factors into itself, making one quirk with 7 quirks inside of it. It has the ability to stockpile energy, and it has the ability to be transferred to anyone along with the previous quirks through the transfer of DNA. The last ability of One for All really isn't an ability. It's more of an element that I think is more important than we realize. And that's the fact that One for All has a void of spirits inside of the quirk. Now everyone knows that Deku can see these vestiges or souls of the previous users of One for All, but no one really questions why that is. Obviously it's a function of the quirk, but as I'm breaking down all the different functions of One for All, this specific element may have the biggest impact in the world of My Hero Academia. So Deku is able to see and interact with the past users of One for All. However, in the void inside of One for All, the past users have the ability to manipulate reality and show the environments that they are most familiar with. For example, again, in My Hero Academia chapter 193, when Deku first experienced these visions of the original user of One for All, he was shown the origin of One for All and how All for One reigned over Japan over 100 years in the past. The original One for All user specifically said that he wanted to show Deku more, but he was only at 20%. Meaning, as Deku rises in his ability to control One for All, he will receive more information and abilities on One for All from the original user and the other users of his quirk. I mentioned earlier in the video that I believe that All for One desired One for All because he knew of an ability, or in this case an element of One for All, that could potentially allow him the ability to control the world. Well, One for All has a function where you have a void of souls, which are the vestiges, controlling the reality of space inside of the quirk, along with the fact that every quirk that's added into One for All is merged into One for All, making it just one quirk instead of multiple quirks inside of a body like All for One. So how would All for One benefit from One for All? What if the combination of One for All and All for One allows the ability to control everyone with a quirk and quirk factor, and it's all inside of the spiritual void inside of One for All? What I mean by this is, what if the complete creation of the new quirk All for All, which is the combination of All for One and One for All, has the ability to manipulate quirk factors from every single person with a quirk in the world, and through that can ultimately control everyone? Not like mind control, but have the ultimate ability to signal and distribute quirk factors through the void inside of One for All. Now, this may be a stretch, but I honestly think something like this may be the reason why All for One needs and desires One for All. The idea behind this ties into the idea that All for One was proceeding to control the entire world, but on his journey and research, something stopped him, and in my opinion, that was One for All somehow. All for One's quirk is just the incomplete version of One for All, and there are similar but non-functioning abilities inside of All for One. Instead of having the ability to merge all quirk factors together to the extent of One for All, All for One has the ability to manipulate and transfer any quirk factors to either himself or to other people. The difference is there are different quirks inside of All for One, whereas One for All is one quirk that essentially merged all the quirks that were inside of One for All. All for One doesn't have the same effect like having vestiges inside his quirk, even though he can hold many quirks. But having the ability to manipulate anyone's quirk factor and ultimately transferring them to whoever he pleases isn't enough. All for One needs to find a way to have the power of One for All, and in that he will be able to control all the vestiges and souls inside of One for All. And having all of the quirks that are already inside of him, so many individuals may add those specific quirks into One for All and more likely turn those previous quirk users into vestiges themselves inside of One for All. Now here is my ambiguous add-on to this theory. I personally believe that at close to 100% One for All, Deku would be able to freely communicate with the vestiges in One for All and also be able to use One for All to either communicate with the quirk factors of other people or allow other people to experience One for All's vestiges, like bringing them actually into the world of One for All. This would be the catalyst to the ability to manipulate and controlling all quirk users in the world. I don't think it's too far-fetched, to be honest. We already know that there are quirks that give people like All for One the ability to activate someone's quirk on a physical level. All for One does this by manipulating the body of Kurogiri to activate the quirk factors to use his warping quirk. And I believe with the combination of All for One and One for All, whoever has both will be able to control all quirks in the world. So, what is One for All? Well, One for All is a special quirk. So special that All for One has been hunting for over 100 years to get it. And it may just be the answer and problem of the world of My Hero Academia as we know it. Well, that all about does it for my video. I hope y'all enjoyed this video, and if you did, definitely smash that like button and sub for dubs to join the Animites on this amazing journey. Let me know in the comment section what you think about my idea. Was I spot on or was I missing anything important? If you would like to discuss more My Hero Academia in general, definitely join my new Discord server in the description below. And you don't have to leave just yet. Why not check out some of the other discussion videos in this playlist here, or check out some of the other content on MangaVation. But until next time, Animites stand up and win your zone every single day.